Hello, my name is Max Boykin with AIDS Foundation of Chicago, and this is...
Atara Young, I'm with Ceasefire.
And we are here with Pride Action Tank. Pride Action Tank is a project of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago to improve the health, safety, and progress of individuals and groups within the LGBTQIA community by inspiring, supporting, and leading collaborative action that improves policy, service, access, and community dynamics in the core areas of housing, health, safety, financial, security, youth, and aging. Please visit our website at www.prideactiontank.org or like us on Facebook at Pride Action Tank and follow us on Twitter at Pride Action Tank or at Pride Action Tank. So today we thought it would be really important coming off of Pride Month and having a lot of beautiful Pride events go on throughout the month, but also to understand what happened specifically in Orlando and how that affects places like Chicago. In Orlando last month, 49 people were killed by a shooter, and more than 50 people were injured in a nightclub specifically for queer people. And that caused a lot of anguish for a lot of people, and a lot of people didn't understand what was going on. There was questions if it was a terrorist attack, was it a hate crime, and really it was both. And we really want to talk about it in a way that how we can talk about it in Chicago, where there is gun violence issues every day here in our communities, and talk about how we're talking about not only the heterosexual or the
publicized black on black crime, but also violence against all populations that in Chicago, not just what we see on the news reported as like daily tallies of violence, but also what happens in all of our communities in terms of violence.
Yes. And there was so much publicity around this, but also there's a lot of publicity around all the things that happen here regularly in Chicago in when we're talking about the violence. And I would love for Atara to introduce herself and talk about some of the work that she does.
Okay. Well, my name is Atara Young, and actually I have two roles. I am the policy director I'm policy director at Ceasefire. I also am in charge of strategic planning as well as partnerships. And what we're doing at Ceasefire is we're casting a larger net around violence. We want to join the movement, and we want to help integrate this concept of violence as a public health issue for everyone in Chicago. And we've been privileged to work and organize something called a Chicago Health Group Network. And in that network, we've made sure that we have a multi-disciplinary and very diverse committee in terms of age, in terms of interest, but we're all impacted by violence. So on our committee sits, any number of people from any different age groups and all different populations, including gender and sexual orientation. That was extremely important to us. I also have the great opportunity to work with BTAN, Black Treatment Advocates Network, and we're also dealing with violence and trying to figure out how do we address violence as a public health issue in addition to HIV, which is our primary focus. But we know because of the populations we serve and the populations we represent, and the people who work for us, that we can't afford to address that in isolation, that it is all our problem. It is a community problem. And so to that end, we also have structural change objectives that we put forth, which are changes in policy, practice, and programs to address violence in our communities.
Yes, thank you for that, Atara. I also sit on VTAN as the advocacy co-chair, where I work on how do we advocate better for HIV and AIDS issues, but also how do we advocate for them specifically in the Black communities. And when we're talking about Black communities here in Chicago, we're talking about how are we getting better treatment for people, not just for HIV and AIDS, but all services. And we understand how there's an intersectionality of different issues that affect our communities, causing for violence. We do have a caller on the line.
Good evening. When you look at what happened in the city of Chicago in terms of violence, I can't help but think some of this stuff is planned. And you look at Conviti Green, how that was done. They told residents at one time when they move out, they'd be able to come back in. And they have condominiums there that sell for as much as $700,000. And one of the first things they did, especially down there on Division Street, and I'm a little bit of a historian, they put a Dominick's there, all right? And you look at what happened in the Inglewood area, look one of the first things they do, they put in a Whole Foods. A lot of stuff that's happening, and if we look at the population, look at the census, blacks are moving out of Chicago, especially the ones that have the resources. They say, hey, why should I live here? I have a family. I don't want my family winding up being a statistic. Every time someone gets killed, and you look at the Chicago Crime Commission report, it has a $5 million effect on the city of Chicago. And multiply that by how many people this year have gotten killed. And every time someone gets killed, whether you like it or not, somewhere, some way, somebody's making money off of it, of other people's misery. And that's the way it is, whatever. And we look at the Inglewood area, there's so many different ways how the banks are buying up the property for the back taxes. And it's just slowly being done that way. And probably in the next 15 years, they're going to have a lot more white folks in Inglewood, because why? It's right along a main street. There's the red line, the green line that's really accessible to downtown. It's not too far away from Midway Airport, and a lot of business is not going to be moving in for nothing. And do the math. Go to Aldi's, you get a dozen eggs for 99 cents, and you go to Whole Foods, $3. Now you figure out who they building certain things around here for. And those are the facts. Look at the census. Blacks are moving out of Chicago, whether you like it or not.
Well, yes. Thank you so very much for that. And those statements are very important. And I think that does get to our I think, a next point that we did really want to talk about was when we're talking about gentrification or displacement of black people. Specifically when you talk about Community Green, or when you even speak on things that are going on in Inglewood, a place that I work a lot, how are we dealing with that displacement of black people and how that affects then overall violence or state violence upon a community? We have gone this past year without a budget. We have also seen many other issues that when we're talking about the displacement of jobs, over 70% of young black men from ages to 18 to 24 not having employment. That also causes an increase on what we call violence in our communities. When we talk about inter-community violence, we see that. But we've also seen, specifically when we speak about Inglewood, Mothers Against Gun Violence be able to actually work on working in their community to work against the violence that is going on. But we do have to talk about how displacement and other things, especially for black people in Chicago, has affected the ability for people to continue to live and thrive in their own communities.
And we have to widen the net. I know at Ceasefire, we have put an emphasis on larger partnerships. So we look at workforce development, we look at education, we look at social justice, particularly in the areas of juvenile justice and reentry, and we look at health, mental health, as well as just general well-being as being things that we need to focus on to support people who are impacted by violence in our communities. So it's not just stop the fire, stop the shooting, but it's also what happens after. And we know that it's a cyclical effect, that it's a circle, that when people are unemployed, whatever economic stratification you come from, if you become unemployed, the likelihood of violence in your environment, in your community, increases. So I think you're right about everything you're saying. And whether or not it's a design plan, it is a plan that's put forth that we're living now. And so we have to organize and we have to address it. Definitely, through actions towards the budget, from block clubs to lobbying to joining an organization that you feel is pushing the agenda forward. We have to address change in our cities, and it's no denial that we are moving out of the city, and we're moving not just out into other cities, but we're also moving out of the county. We may be staying on the periphery as well. And so we do need to consider that. So are other populations, but we're moving out of the city in record numbers. So that is true, and we have to have a plan to address that.
And understanding when you are moving to, say, the south suburbs, there are actual less services for people in the collar part of the county, and also the collar counties that you don't get in the city of Chicago. And when that happens to people, how does that also influence those communities that are living there? Many of those, again, being black communities, and actually not having, again, the services that they need. We've seen that with a rise in HIV rates for people living in the south suburbs, and also not having the actual capacities for those organizations that are out there to be able to treat them in the same way that they are able to in Chicago because of, say, a better public transportation system in the city. And we understand how that continuously affects the people, especially black queer people in the city of Chicago and Cook County, and overall, because as they are moving out, we understand that this affects everyone. And so again, thank you. We have, if people have continued comments, questions, call into Pride Action Tank at 312-738-1060. Atar, I would also like to ask, when you brought up mental health, that was actually something that was really important. I know last week in the city of Chicago, Jessica Hampton was killed on the 47th Red Line stop, not very far from where I live. And that was something that really caused I know concern for some people, and understanding like that was something that was really important and really understanding, and but the man that ended up killing her also needed mental health help that is not actually here for him in the city. Talk about kind of how we are connecting these issues.
Well, the dissemination of mental health services, we've seen this in the past 3 years with the closing on the south side of the Woodline Health Facility, which was instrumental for years in addressing mental health issues as well as substance abuse issues in our communities on the south side. It was a keystone, a cornerstone place. There are other places in the city that exist, but it was extremely important to the success of how we practice mental health, particularly in the Woodline area, but also on Chicago's south side. It was a resource that was widely used. And so we traded this in for the belief that there are services dispersed throughout our city, which is not actually happening. There's a challenge in funding mental health services in our city, in that there's the supervisory level of mental health services in a public health setting is almost unaffordable to us. The capacity of us to bring doctors here, psychologists here to supervise that system has been challenging. Getting those resources out through a public system has been challenging, so that our people don't have, and when I say our people, I mean people of color, people living on the south and west sides, and our LGBTQ community who also need those services, don't have access to those services in a place where they need them. For people, Woodline was a big deal because it was familiar. It was familiar to people. It was word of mouth. It was a high area. We don't have other facilities necessarily like that throughout the city. And so it has been a challenge. And as you can see, as Tom Dart has put forth, again, I'm not promoting Tom Dart, but I'm saying that he has been successful in putting forth the issues of mental health, their relationship to having a jail full of people who really have mental health issues. And then when we look at that, we can see that as being a state violence, because we aren't providing for people the services they need to have just a basic standard of care here. So they're being denied access to quality mental health care services. Because it's not accessible and it's not widely provided and it's not funded. So that's the heart of the matter, is that we're not funding it in an adequate way so that it can get to people. But you also see how that impacts the jail system. And if we look at that in the school setting and what's happening in schools around mental health, is that we're losing the standards that we have now for IEPs. So a lot of students will be mainstreamed and their reading disabilities will be ignored. The challenges they experience will be ignored. And so what does that mean to them in their long-term growth? What does that mean? Are we going to see these people later in our system because they haven't been able to manage the challenges around education because they learn differently and they become frustrated in the system and we see them as a problem? Again, we look at that as the pipeline to penitentiary. So there's so many layers of violence that are happening here. Violence in the fact that it is a structural and almost physical denial of access to things that Black folk need to attain happiness, to attain health, to attain success in this society. It's not being equitable to what we see in other communities and other populations. So I think the challenge here is not just the funding of those resources, but we also have to advocate in our communities that those services are valid and that where they are accessible, that they be culturally competent as well. So we need to demand them in our school settings, we need to demand them in community settings, and we need to demand adequate services within our prisons because prison health is community health.
Yes, and when we think about prisons and jails in the state of Illinois, Cook County Jail is currently the largest mental health provider in the state of Illinois by far, and when we think about that is where we send the people that actually need mental health services, and many people actually have gone to getting locked up to actually get the mental health service that they need because that's the only place that they can actually afford it or get it for their communities. And when we see places like no longer having Woodlawn Health Center there for people to actually go to, no longer having many mental health clinics, and when you put that on top of having state and city budget issues, now we do not have, then you have people constantly worried if they're going to continue to have a job where they can actually help people with mental health issues, where they can continue to help people in their communities. And see, when, as Atara was talking about, when we're talking about our schools, when we're talking about actually, putting things in place for students that are dealing with a lot of these issues that we see in our communities, actually giving them a place where they can speak, having more social workers in schools. I know that's something that has been talked about, but actually putting in plan where we can put more social workers in schools to help students, not just with mental health problems, but also just problems that they are currently having at home, so they can actually come to school, get a good education, and actually bring that to the next point of actually being able to get those jobs. Because again, we talk about health of our communities, and we're talking about overall being able to thrive in our communities. We're talking about good educations. We're also talking about being able to be healthy, and that actually, when we talk about combating against violence in our communities and violence as a whole, those things really do combat against it. Having good health, including mental health services, on top of good education and paying jobs, actually allows for people to be safer and healthier. So, Atara, I know we've talked a little bit about kind of what Ceasefire has been able to do, but can you talk a little bit more on some of the ideas and plans that Ceasefire has moving forward?
Well, Ceasefire currently, and we want to say thank you up front. We are in the Illinois state budget for $4.4 million. So I want to say thank you to community members and to state representatives and to aldermen in this city who really work to make sure and recognize the fact that wherever Ceasefire has been in partnership with communities, we saw a decrease in violence. So we don't claim to be the sole reason why those things happen. We know that, like in Inglewood, our success is reflected in the work that is done by people in the communities, and so we're part of that process. There are many variables that contribute to a decrease in violence in the communities, and for us, those successes have happened because we have those level of partnerships. So we're looking to grow those partnerships. We're looking to be back in as many communities as possible, but we also have a hospital-based program that not many people know about, and so we want to continue to grow those programs. We, again, as I mentioned, have a community, Chicago Health Group Network, which you are a member of, and we have several members in our group who are from committees, from different backgrounds, from different disciplines. And that's been extremely important to us because we want to move forward with a plan that is from the community. And so we do that. It takes time, but we are in the process of making structural change objectives, again, changes to policy, practice, and programs that will address violence in our community. So one thing is that we've expanded that we want to bring the message of public health to communities in a way that is generated by them, that is their interest. And so that committee is working to that end and being very successful. We also, again, want to say thank you to the people who continue to support us and allow us to have funding. I think lastly, again, we're building those partnerships because it doesn't just happen, violence doesn't just happen in a void. Someone told me, one of my mentors told me that violence is a result of unmet needs. So there are social determinants of health that are being met in our communities. That's around health, which includes nutrition, that's around education, that's around employment, that's around access, and around the perception that there's justice, in our society, that there's a well-being, that they can achieve equity. And so those things being hugely void in our community make us no more violent than any other population. They compound the situation that we happen to be in our communities. And so Ceasefire is working with communities. We're being informed by communities on what the process of addressing violence as a public health issue is through changing structures. And that's why it's been a joy to work with you and with a lot of the other youth on our committee and a lot of the other people who've had vast experience in doing community work, because we're able to really entrench ourselves in real partnerships, strategic partnerships that will sustain.
And we have thank you again, Tara. And we have a caller on the line. What's your name?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I'm just listening. It's concerning the black neighborhood. You see, the black neighborhood should be directed by the churches. The pastors must get together, and then they could go to the members, and the members to the neighborhood. First, then that'll draw the members to the church. First of all, the churches need a bank. The church don't need the other folks' bank. That way they can do business out of the bank and test the neighborhood. You must test the neighborhood, otherwise they'll run wild. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Also, to go along, there are many people in the communities that are doing amazing work. I know the Residential Association of Greater Inglewood and RAGE is doing great work. Teamwork Inglewood, and so many more organizations that are doing
Inspire Inglewood. Yeah. Imagine Inglewood.
Imagine Inglewood. And then also when we talk about Woodlawn, there's the Woodlawn community that is also working very hard that are people in the community that are doing amazing work to build up their communities. And I think for organizations like Ceasefire, Pride Action Tank, and so many more other great organizations that are willing to get real community input when we're talking about all these different issues that are going on, and how do we really move to like true health equity and try to end something such as gun violence, but overall violence against people. And when we're talking about violence, we also have to bring up how violence looks against some of the most marginalized people in our community. When we're talking about women, when we're talking about queer people, and when we're talking about people that a lot of times are on the fringes. So again, I want to thank all our callers and everyone who called in, and thank you. Thank everyone, and really think about this. Please, again, go to Pride Action Tank, www.prideactiontank.org. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter to understand the issues that we're talking about, and let's really try to make our communities better. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.